So without further ado, I'd now like to introduce our first presenter, Molly Bowman. Molly Bowman is the editorial director at Clarivate Analytics. Molly has over 10 years of experience in the life science industry supporting companies in the global generic pharmaceutical sector. In her current role, she is responsible for overseeing the content collection and integration of the Cortellis for generic intelligent product suite. Previously, Molly worked in the veterinary products and environmental field as a project coordinator and quality assurance officer. She holds a degree in chemistry from Smith College and performed graduate studies at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Over to you, Molly.
Many thanks, Diana, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining. As Diana said, I'm going to take a look at some of the trends in global API manufacturing, some of the impacts of COVID, and what some of us are anticipating for the future. So we'll look a little bit at the market size, some of the geography of where we see API manufacturing hubs, some of the trends and shifts we've seen happen, again, as well as a little bit of the hopefully future, some of the investments in deal making, and of course the impacts of what the pandemic has done for global manufacturing. So if we look at the active ingredient market overall, you can look at a number of different analyst reports, but most of it expects to see continued growth up to $290 billion by 2026. Now, a lot of people saw a decline essentially in 2020 due to COVID, but most of that is expecting a recovery and growth in 2021 and anticipating seeing that continue. You can see in that top graph that the merchant and captive market is split about 40-60. Of course, synthetic API continues to be dominant, although biotech, as we've seen in almost every analyst report, is the fastest growing segment. It's not surprising that the captive API market is larger, and of course, I don't think to anyone's surprise, North America continues to be the largest consumer of active ingredients, although Asia Pacific is probably the fastest growing. Here at Clarivate, we look at the API manufacturing landscape, and globally, we rate those companies based on their ability to supply into regulated markets. Everything from big pharma to companies that are local and focused only on supplying into their own regional markets. Those that fall into an unrated are simply companies that we don't either have enough information or are so highly specialized that they don't fit into a categorization. If we look a little bit more at API manufacturing locations, you can see that the top 5 countries just in total number of manufacturers is going to be China, India, then with the US and Japan. But as you can see also in the color rankings there, that China and India in the gray bars have a tremendous amount of manufacturers that supply into their own local markets, and that is their focus. One of the things we've seen over the last decade plus is shifts in that manufacturing, as most of you will be familiar with. So looking at the trends from 2006 in the purple bars to 2012 in the green and then 2020 in the dark blue there, you can see that Italy has seen a decline. Most of this is due to acquisition, consolidation of manufacturers and manufacturing sites in the country, whereas both India and China have seen growth, although China's seeing a little bit of shift. And again, part of that's consolidation, part of that is mergers and acquisitions as well, and also some of the environmental controls that have come into play have reduced the number of manufacturers. Now, if we look at U.S. drug master filings, of course, India is represented there in the top line. So they continue to lead in the number of DMF filings, although, as you can see, China in the green there have more than doubled since 2010. The decline you see at the end there in 2020, part of that I think is due to COVID, and the other aspect is that there's still some data processing we're in the midst of, so it's not fully representative of 2020, but I suspect that the numbers will probably stay a little bit lower than we've seen in the past. And similarly, if we look at COSs or CEPs, you can see again, India outranks pretty much every other country by the total number of filings. And again, China in the green there continues to make significant strides in that, whereas the US has declined, whereas Germany and Italy are also in that downward trend. Obviously, one of the questions we see a lot is where are other hubs of manufacturing going to take place, or are we going to see shifts in API manufacturing trends? As you can see here, if we look at a lot of other countries that have local API manufacturing, the sheer volume of manufacturers is nowhere close to the numbers we see in India and China. And again, there's likely going to be little indication that we're going to see massive shifts into those. It's not that there won't be companies investing in manufacturing in those regions, but we're just not going to see the scale that we currently see by sheer number of manufacturers. Now, if we look a little bit at what is happening in big pharma and what is happening in R&D, this is looking at 2019 R&D expenditure. And as you can see here in the purple, the top is cancer. That is where almost all big pharma R&D expenditure is going, then a little bit into nervous system immunomodulators. So what that means, of course, for API manufacturers is that we're seeing a continued shift to specialty products, more complex formulations. I think to nobody's surprise, in 2020, 58% of new molecular entities were rare conditions or orphan drug treatments in the US. So again, these sorts of specialized products are going to require different kinds of facilities, new investments, and likely additional costs for many manufacturers. They also may require more specialized raw materials, so that also is going to adjust how companies are selecting partners, finding sources. This, of course, also will impact how companies are targeting and what kinds of drugs they're targeting. So if we look at the loss of exclusivity for products in the US, and these are total numbers of small molecules in purple and biologic products in green, you can see that there are still a tremendous amount of small molecule products that will be losing patent or exclusivity expiry in the next few years. Now, of course, in response to this, many companies have continued to invest in specialty manufacturing. So you can see starting there in North America, numerous companies are investing in highly potent facilities, whether it's through acquisition or whether it's through expansion and investment within their own facilities. You can see there in Europe, again, the same thing, lots of investment into API, highly potent facilities. Some of it is, again, expansion. Some of it is local, is just acquisition. And then in Asia Pacific, we see a few of these. A few of these I've highlighted just because they are, again, typically specialized products and facilities that require considerable handling. Another piece of this response to the move towards more specialty products we see are deal making. So a tremendous amount of the companies there, the acquisitions or the deals that they made were focuses on oncology products, focuses on biotech, focuses on specialty products or specialty product lines, as well as specific technologies or handling. And a lot of these companies, we're seeing that consistently, trying to reposition themselves or trying to be very strategic about what's coming down the line. So, of course, we have to talk a little bit about the pandemic and the impacts of that. We certainly all saw in the midst of 2020 the demand for antibiotics, for respiratory drugs and antivirals significantly increased. And, of course, that was happening at the same time that borders were closing or that ships were stuck at ports as countries were trying to figure out what to do and how to limit. This also led to a number of governments and companies reevaluating their supply chains, trying to understand where other risks could be exposed or what they needed to do to reduce reliance on certain areas that maybe were in different kinds of states of shutdown. And it's likely some of this is going to continue as we are continuing to see surges in cases, in vaccine rollout. So looking at some of the outlook, again, we're going to see buyers continue to value quality, reliability. We're seeing more selective partner choices. Again, more regulation in both established markets as well as emerging markets. It's unlikely that we're going to see any new API manufacturing hubs forming. And the specialized products that are being approved and that are losing exclusivity are going to favor likely European and US companies that have really specialized facilities. We've also seen, I think, numerous legislative actions to try to incentivize manufacturing coming back into the U.S., EU, India, and Japan have all made either announcements or essentially looking at how they can incentivize local manufacturing, whether it's back to reducing their reliance on China or whether it's simply ensuring that the supply chain they have from everything from active ingredients to reagent chemicals is less of a risk going forward. So thank you very much for your time, and I'd like to hand it back to Diana.